Hi everyone, today I wanted to show you a really interesting way for black to handle the Scotch game. Let's take a look. So the Scotch game arises after the following moves. We have e4, e5, knight to f3, knight to c6 and d4 signifying the Scotch game. And after e takes on d4 we're going to be primarily focusing on what happens after knight takes on d4. So there are many different moves that black can play in this position, but I'm going to be focusing on the seventh most popular move, well, seventh most popular according to the lichess database, and the sixth most popular move on the master game database, and that is this very odd looking queen h4 idea. So this rare move is named the Steinitz Variation, obviously named after the first world champion Wilhelm Steinitz, and at first glance this move looks really silly. Black has developed his queen to the side of the board and he's looking to maybe try and grab this pawn on e4, but in actual fact it's actually rather tricky to try and defend this pawn, and I've seen many different ways that white can go wrong in this position. So let's have a look at some of the ways that white can go wrong straight off the bat. I think we can firstly rule out things like g3. I have had this played against me before online, but this of course loses to just queen takes on e4. The best line to not lose a horrendous amount of material is maybe putting the queen to e2. After this we can capture, and well, in this position black is doing absolutely fine here. He's up a pawn and he's even encouraged a small weakness here for white to try and contend with on the light squares. So this is absolutely fine. Another move that you could see in this line is bishop to d3, and at first glance this looks pretty good. We're defending the pawn. Oh, but we just dropped the knight. So of course this line is another little trap that white could fall into in this line. So another move that I've seen played against me is bishop to e2, and this again looks okay. Maybe we're trying to gambit a pawn here and maybe get a nice position. Here it's probably a mistake to take this pawn, as actually I think white gets some nice counterplay in this line. So something like this maybe, and actually I think white's doing absolutely fine here. He's got a nice lead in development and he's got these open files to do stuff against black. So instead of this, what black should play against this line, and I think is much stronger, is playing the move bishop to c5. I really like this move. So we're now threatening through an x-ray this attack on f2. So this knight obviously doesn't want to move because if it does it's going to fall into that problem. So instead, what has white done in this position? Well, they've normally developed their bishop to e3. After this we can actually capture here with our bishop. After this bishop takes back, we can take this pawn, and what's interesting about this is after the bishop takes on g7, this is in fact a mistake, as now we can take here on g2, and we're threatening both the rook and also forking this bishop as well. So okay, in for a penny, in for a pound, white says. He captures this rook, we capture back with a check. The bishop comes back to f1 to try and block the check, and after which we can come to e4. We count the material after, well actually let's say e2 now in this case, and then this capture first. And now we count the material, and you can see here black is up a clear pawn and has got a very pleasant looking position. There's no real dramas here. The only thing that white has got in this position is the fact that he's got the bishop pair, but other than that he's not going to be winning this particular position. So rather surprisingly, on the lichess database, the second most popular move in this position is in fact the move knight takes on c6. And you probably think there's nothing wrong with this particular line. The problem is now we can come in with the check. And I've had this position quite a lot online, and I've been able to win some very easy games from this position. After the move queen to e2, let's say, which again has been reached a number of times, we can have this particular exchange, and after this we're doing absolutely fine for black. We're going to get our bishops out to very good squares and then hopefully castle alongside as well. If let's say moves like bishop to f4 are played to try and hit your bishop, you can play things like just put your bishop onto d6 and then block that potential attack. So you're doing absolutely fine in this position. So let's have a look at some of the better tries that white has played. The first one isn't really all that good, but I guess it's not as bad as some of the other lines that we've seen. And that's the move knight to f5. It's got an interesting idea just to hit this queen, but you shouldn't worry against this here. Just capture this pawn. After knight moves back to e3 to block the check, the best move here is actually to develop your knight first. And after, let's say, a move like knight to c3, you could just put your bishop onto b4 and pin this knight. And this bishop's got a nice role. You're going to see this quite a bit in some of the better main lines, where this bishop will either sacrifice itself, or I say sacrifice, exchange itself on c3, or tuck itself back onto a5 followed by b6 to create some pressure along this diagonal. This also has an extra feature in that it defends the c7 pawn, which we're going to see is a bit of a weakness in this position. Bishop to e3 is another try. I guess the problem with this is it just drops a pawn by force, but I think the first move to play here that's interesting is the move knight to f6, and after the capture of the knights, and let's say we exchange off these pawns, and a move like e5, it looks as though white is doing okay in this position. The problem here is black has got a very nice resource with the move knight to g4, and here we're going to win this bishop by force, and it also is exploited by the fact that this pawn is pinned, which creates a bit of an issue for how white best develops in this position. Knight to f3 has also been tried as well, just moving back the knight, a bit like f5 to be fair, after which we can take here on e4. If the bishop comes to e2, then we just develop, and again we'll just be looking to get our pieces out, maybe castle, and we've got a fine position. We are up a pawn here and it's fine. Okay, so let's have a look at another move that is worth considering and worth being prepared against as black, and that's the move knight to b5. I will be honest with you, I think this knight move is actually a little bit premature in this position, but it does have a name, so any opening that's got some name is probably a little bit okay. So this one's called the Horwitz attack. After this we can play the move bishop to b4. I think this is the best line that you can play, and there's been a number of different responses that white can play. We'll have a look at each of them in turn. So c3 to block this, and now we put our bishop back to a5. This is a very nice plan. We're now defending this c7 square, which has become under threat, and we don't need to then move our king like we have to do in some of the other lines. Well, an example line goes like this: bishop to d3, now defending the pawn on e4, a6, now hitting this knight. The knight goes back to a3, a bit of a ridiculous situation that this knight has ended up on this very weak square. And now we can put our bishop onto b6. We're now hitting this pawn on f2. And it's quite an interesting position. Black is probably doing absolutely fine here, as he's managed to get his pieces nicely developed, ahead in development, and it should do fine here. And if, let's say, the knight comes to c3, which is another move, again we can play our bishop back to a5. Again, we're defending this pawn and we're not having to move our king onto d8, so this is probably fine as well. Bishop to d3 again is a likely line. After a6, the knight goes back to a3. And what's interesting about this position is we've got this very interesting resource with b5. This has been reached in about 70 games. And well, we're just threatening just to push our pawn forward to essentially fork these two knights. It's funny enough, the move that's been played the most on the lichess database is actually knight to b1, so a bit of a ridiculous situation that's occurred. Okay, and the last way that white can block the check is the move bishop to d2. This time round we can't really play a move like bishop to ace5, because obviously that drops the bishop, so now we just captured this pawn. After bishop to e2, we now have to reluctantly defend this pawn on c7 because it's about to fall. After castles, okay, we can start swapping off a few things, but I think this position's actually okay for black. We're up a pawn, but we've got a simple plan of development. We can play d6, put our bishop onto h3 and start harassing the white king, and then maybe develop our other pieces, maybe knight to f6, rook to e8 as well. So this is okay as well, and this knight is still a little bit stupidly placed on b5 at this point. Okay, another try that's a little bit better than the last one, and I've faced this quite a bit over the board, is the move queen to d3. Again, I think this is a good attempt by white to try and hold on to his position, but I think actually this is fine for black, as he does have some nice tactical resources here. So here I think the best thing to do is to develop this knight to f6, create some more pressure on this pawn. If this knight comes to d2, obviously if it goes to c3 we run into this pin, which is why they might prefer to come to d2. This time round we've got this very nice tactic. We can play knight to g4 here, and this is a very difficult tactic to play against. If they play the move g3, well, we just tuck our bishop back here, and now we're attacking this knight and also simultaneously attacking this pawn. The best move here is to move the knight back to f3, after which we just develop, and we've got a very pleasant position. How white holds onto this pawn I do not know. He might try stuff like maybe playing e5, but we just take this pawn and we've got a very nice position here. So going back, let's have a look at this knight to c3 idea. Against this, once again, we could just pin this knight. If this capture occurs, we take back on c6. After bishop to d2, we can start swapping off everything, and actually we've ended up going up a pawn in this position. Just be careful here, as this queen move looks tempting, but it falls to this tactic here, so you've got to be a little bit careful of that in this line. So instead of this, you want to take with this knight first. That now threatens this very nasty check with the queen and the knight teaming up together. And here, even after this bishop takes, you take here first, and your attack is much faster against white's attack, and actually this just wins very, very easily against white. So just remember that, take with the knight, don't take with the queen here. Another move that's been employed here by white is the move g3. Against this we now take with our queen here, and after these couple captures and the dust settles, black is actually up a pawn and enjoys a very good position. It's very similar to one of the positions that we had earlier in the video. Even after bishop to g2, we could just put our bishop to f5, and after castles, I think actually black's doing absolutely fine here. In fact, I would even say is probably winning. He's got very comfortable development, he's up a pawn, and he's still got the two bishops to use in this position. Okay, so let's have a look at the final position from our main position here, and that is the main line. That starts with the move knight to c3, and this is a very good move because it not only develops but it also defends this pawn on e4. Against this we need to play the move bishop to b4, and again we've still got some little tricks and traps in this particular line. Things like if, let's say, they play their bishop to d3, we can take this knight. If they maybe play bishop to e3, then there's some little tricks that we've got with knight f6 and then attacking on g4 with the knight. Here it's also got a nice secondary plan with our bishop, is maybe we can tuck it back to a5 followed by b6, and this covers against some of the trickier lines that white can play in this position, one of which is actually the move knight to b5, which now tries to immediately attack this weak c7 pawn because our queen is no longer there. Against this we've actually got a nice tricky move, bishop to a5, now defending this pawn, and now again this knight's looking a little bit silly coming all the way to this particular square. So going back, what else could white do in this position? Well, following the main line here, the best move for white is in fact the move, and it might surprise you, bishop to e2. It's the third most popular move on the lichess database, so a lot of people have been able to find this move, and this is the correct main line. White is actually just going to give up a pawn, but he then justifies this by saying, well, at least I'm ahead in development, at least I can get my pieces to very active squares and make black's life a little bit difficult here. So against this, what we need to do is, okay, not play d6, but actually capture this pawn, and this is the main line. It isn't great for black, but at least we'll go up a pawn and we'll try and defend this bad position up a pawn. So what will happen now is now the knight will come back, come to b5, now hitting this pawn. So what do we do in this position? Well, the bishop to a5 line, it doesn't actually work. The problem here is now the knight can capture, and this bishop cannot capture back because, oh dear, we forgot about this queen. Remember, this bishop was holding a key role in pinning this knight here. So what do we play instead? Well, here we need to remember this move, which is the move captures here on c3 with our bishop. And against this, white's best line is to capture with the pawn. He probably doesn't want to do it with the knight because he's got this attack going on here on c7. So b takes on c3, doubling up these pawns and isolating a few pawns as well. I guess that's a little thing. Now we have to play the move d8, which isn't a great move. It's not great that we have to keep our king in the centre, but at least we've got a little bit of play in this line, and also we're up a pawn. So if we can find a way to get to the end game without our position totally collapsing, we're probably doing absolutely fine here. Castle short, knight to f6, developing a piece. Knight comes to d4 to try and then, I guess, try and come up with something productive for this knight. Captures, pawn captures back, rook to e8, creating a bit of pressure on this bishop. Now bishop to f3, hitting this queen, and now queen back to g6. As I say, this is the mainline position. White's is better here, but at least we've got a little bit of play that we can go for, namely with stuff like d6, maybe getting our bishop onto h3 and creating some problems there. And there we go. So that is our little tricky line against the Scotch game. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did like what you see, make sure you leave a like. Subscribe to the channel if you managed to get to the end. And if you like this particular line, let me know if there's any other lines that you would like to see on this channel as well. Take care. Bye.